The Best of Our Knowledge explores topics on learning, education, and research. On today's show, we'll set sail. A Vermont science teacher is embarking on a mission to study the effects of climate change on New York's Adirondack Park. And a new smartphone app is informing property owners on Lake George on what they can do to protect water quality. I'm Lucas Willard, host of The Best of Our Knowledge. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm your host, Lucas Willard. The summer vacation season is here, and many visitors are flocking to the Adirondack Park in northern New York for hiking, camping, and sailing. But the 6 million acre state park that's known for its lush forests and plentiful lakes and ponds, more than 3,000, is at risk of damages caused by climate change. This year's New York state budget includes funding for a landmark study on how a warming Earth is affecting the region, called SCALE, or Survey of Climate Change on Adirondack Lake Ecosystems. At a time when more are looking to assess the health of the largest state park in the country, a local science teacher is sailing as many Adirondack lakes as he can this summer. Bill Burrell hopes to visit as many as 50 lakes and plans to interview scientists, business owners, and local residents about the state of the park and chronicle his adventures in a book. Bill is used to this kind of voyage. He previously skied the length of Vermont to report on shortening winters. I met Bill on Lake Champlain in late June at Port Douglas on the New York side for his first sail of his Adirondack journey. On a breezy, overcast day, we sailed Corlear Bay directly across the lake from Burlington, Vermont. After Bill lowered his small single-mast craft into the water, we cruised some choppy waves towards Schuyler Island and chatted about his ambitious summer sailing plans.
So this summer I intend to start here. Actually, we've got a big wave right here and a gust coming up, so hang on. So this summer I want to meet people who are doing research in the Adirondacks on lake sediment, on wildlife, on riparian zones, on the lakes, on the temperature of the lakes, and especially on winter too. So it's sort of, there's a lot of reasons why I'm doing it. It's to sort of get back to my roots in sailing those Adirondack lakes, but also sort of calling more attention to the problem of what's happening in the Adirondacks, and particularly the lakes in the higher elevation areas.
Have you ever done anything like this before? When was the last time you spent a lot of time sailing in the Adirondacks specifically?
That's in 2003. I had a 12-foot O'Day, and I trailered it to about 15 lakes over there in Middle Saranac Lake, Lower Saranac Lakes, Indian Lake, Long Lake, Forked Lake, and it was probably one of the best vacations of my life. I consider it's a micro vacation, and you can sort of another big wave here. It's a micro vacation, and I love the fact that I can cut down on my carbon footprint just by taking the ferry over to Vermont, or to the Adirondacks, which is actually where I'm from originally. I grew up sailing on a small lake called Peck's Lake, and when I was around 11 years old, I looked down underneath the bow of the boat, and I could see all the way down to the bottom, around 20 or 30 feet down into the water. And I remember saying to my father at that time how I commented how incredibly pristine and clean the lake was, and that it was just a sign of how healthy the Adirondacks were. And this was in the mid to late 70s, and he looked at me and he said, actually, these lakes are dying. And he said that he explained that the water was so clean because there was not as much aquatic life and life going on in the lakes. And we learned throughout the 1980s that the acid rain was literally killing our lakes in the Adirondacks in the Northeast.
Is that a moment that
changed or influenced your life and why you wanted to dig more into science and ultimately become a science teacher?
That moment changed my life in so many different ways, but one of the things that I wanted to do was become a scientist and prevent that pollution that was coming into the lakes. And all I visualized at that time was sort of like launching a small Boston whaler as my job and going around and sampling the lakes and testing their pH levels and their pollution levels. And that was sort of like what I really wanted to do with my life. And so I went to school and I went to college and I got a chemistry degree from the State University of New York at Plattsburgh, and became a chemist for a few years, mostly in private industry, but then for a few years with DEC. And that moment, I will never forget that moment, just looking down into that lake and having my dad explain to me the devastation that acid rain was doing. And I think that's another reason why I want to do this trip this summer, is because I want to document the Adirondacks, but I also sort of want to save it for future generations. I think while we solved the acid rain problem for the most part, I never thought that we would face this other huge problem that's sweeping across the Adirondacks and just sweeping across the world right now in terms of the temperature rising and losing our cryosphere. Well, cryosphere is any place on Earth that has snow or ice. So that day sort of set in motion this lifelong dream of saving the Adirondacks, but also I never thought at all that I would ever face something as big as climate change. And the more and more I learn about it and the impact that it's having in the Adirondacks as well as Vermont, it's really a little bit overwhelming when I really dig into the science, and I'm really afraid of what's going to be happening in the next 10 to 15 years.
The region right now is under an air quality alert because of the wildfires in Canada. And I think that's illustrative of just the threats that the region is facing right now. And if you look across the horizon right now, I'm looking back on the hills on the New York side, and there's a haze. Here's just some illustration as to exactly what you're trying to point out, right?
It's incredible, and I'm so thankful that we were able to meet today and talk a little bit about that during this particular week, because I live in Burlington, and on Sunday morning I went to walk my dog down, and all of the Burlington city beaches were closed due to a cyanobacteria bloom. And I couldn't believe it because that was the first time where I had seen all of the Burlington city beaches had been closed simultaneously. And usually you just get 1 or 2 or 3 beaches that are closing, but all 7 or 8 of them were closed. And so I went down and I walked along the beach, not going into the water, letting my dog near the water, because it can have some pretty negative impacts for dogs as well as small children. And as I was looking across the lake, I could not see Juniper Island, which is only, it's actually off of our starboard side. Those are the Four Brothers right there. And then further north, it's hard to see, but Juniper Island is about a mile off the coast of Burlington. And I couldn't see Juniper Island. I couldn't see any of the boats out in the middle of the lake due to the fire. And so it was like this, sort of like this powerful moment where I realized not just what we're doing, but I'm really alarmed at how fast it's happening. And 20 years ago, I never saw beaches in Burlington closed. So seeing the blue-green algae blooms this early in the summer, I don't believe I've ever seen it in June before. It's usually in July or August when the waters get really warm. So that was like another moment where it just was really sort of taken aback by what we're doing to this lake, mostly because it's warming. The wildfires in Quebec are natural. They often happen with lightning strikes, and they're letting them burn, from what I understand. It's just part of the natural process. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the ground is drying out more and more, and so we're going to see more and more of these fires. I remember seeing them in California 5 or 10 years ago, and we never received any of the smoke, but now it's really starting to hit home. It's coming closer, And here we are, we're dealing with wildfires in Quebec that are creating incredibly unhealthy air quality indexes. In Burlington, the air quality index was at 172 on Monday, and people were on the bike path wearing masks because there was so much smoke in the air. So as we warm up the planet, we are drying out the forest floor and the debris on the forest floor, and a lightning strike is igniting them. A lot of people think that the Adirondacks are what's called an asbestos forest. Not that it contains asbestos, but that it's kind of fireproof because of the broadleaf deciduous trees here. But if you talk to some forest rangers, I know that they're concerned, and they feel like we might want to start thinking about hiring more forest rangers to someday, sadly, fight fires in the Adirondacks. When you think of 6 million acres of forests and the fact that it could ignite, it's just, I can't even fathom that. Someplace where I grew up, just sort of like experiencing fires, and here we are, like they're happening right now. You can almost, well, you can't see Canada from here, but they're happening right over that ridgeline, those forest fires. If it was, I do wonder if we were out here at night, if we could see the glow of them. That would be kind of interesting, but just maybe within 100 miles from here, the forest fires are happening, so yeah.
Getting choppier out here.
Yeah, you know, and what's happened is we're coming into the shadow of an island, so the wind is calming down, but the waves are still present, so we don't have the wind sort of heeling us over to keep it stable, and we're just getting some choppy waves.
So tell me about this island here. Let's change the subject for a little bit. So tell me about this island that we're coming up on right now. How, are you familiar with it? Have you sailed around it before?
This island is actually part of the Adirondack Park, and it's called Schuyler Island, and it played a fairly significant role in the Revolutionary War because Benedict Arnold had kept some of his gunboats here during the Battle of Valcourt, and the British came down from Quebec and chased Benedict Arnold south, and he stopped off at this island and heavily damaged ships, and he ended up sinking a few off, I think, the southern point of this island. And so historically it's a significant island, and then throughout the years it was owned privately. In fact, the Whitneys of New York City owned it for a while, and they sold it in 1940 to a man who built a farmhouse and brought cattle. There's actually an old barge somewhere along the shoreline there, and he brought cattle and sheep out to the island in the summertime, and he raised cattle and sheep. And then I think in the 1960s the state of New York purchased it, so it's forever wild, and there's a couple of campsites on it that are free. You can go out there. I would love to go on it and show you some of it. It looks like it's a completely forested island, but in the very middle is a beautiful meadow just surrounded by mountains, and you feel like you're sort of in Montana or somewhere, because when you get out there you can start to see on a clear day both the Adirondacks and Vermont. So it's a beautiful island, but a lot of people don't go onto it because it's covered in poison ivy. So yeah, it's an incredible island. You can see Burlington from it, and you can camp out on it and see the lights of Burlington at night, and it's pretty quiet. It's amazing that it's so close to such a city as Burlington, and within 10 miles you could be out here and feel like you're in complete wilderness. We got a big wave coming up right here. Not too bad.
So now back to your summer plans here. You're hoping to go to 40 to 50 lakes, and are you looking to just meet people? Is this as much of a sort of a science trip as it is like anthropological trip? Are you hoping to speak to people along the way?
I am indeed. I'm lining up interviews because I do want to write an article about this experience. And so I'm lining up interviews with scientists and people who are running not-for-profit organizations, and even businesses. I'm lining up some interviews with some businesses. So for example, I'm going to be interviewing some scientists from Paul Smith's College in Saranac Lake who are doing absolutely incredible work studying climate change in the Adirondacks. So I'll be meeting some scientists. There's a scientist out of the University of Albany who recently started taking lake sediment core samples out of the Adirondack lakes, and she and her colleagues are studying the sediments to see the history of climate change as well as what could be happening to the lakes. So I'm also going to be interviewing a whitewater rafting company to see the impact that floods and droughts are having on their business, and some fly fishermen up around Ausable who are seeing bentho macroinvertebrates getting sort of wiped out and washed out during heavy rain events. So, but I have to remind myself that I'm going to the Adirondacks, and I want to enjoy every moment of it as much as I can, so I don't want to get too bogged down in the science of it. I do want to meet all of those people who are doing the incredible work, but I also want to I want to sail all day long through all of the different lakes and sleep on my boat at night and just crawl up into some nice little tributaries and drop my anchor in the weeds and make dinner off of my little barbecue grill I have off the stern. And I do want to enjoy the Adirondacks immensely this summer.
I feel like a lot of people are turned off when they hear about climate change. They don't like the gloom and doom, or they don't want to pay attention to it. But why is sharing an experience and bringing it home, how is that important to communicating science?
I think you sort of hit on something that's really preventing us from really doing something about the problem. And I've really changed my attitude, my thoughts lately about convincing other people that it's happening and that we have to stop burning fossil fuels. I think burning fossil fuels is going to be a big part of the key of solving this problem. But when I look at my retirement pension and I see Shell oil in my my pension that I don't really have a lot of control over, and if we all looked at our portfolios and saw how much even the environmentalists, I think, who are talking about stopping fossil fuels, I don't know how much we realize. We've got some big waves coming up. I don't think people realize how much we're tied into the oil industry, and I'm not a proponent of the oil industry, and I think we could get off of fossil fuels. But I think two things. I think convincing people that we should save this for our future generations. As a teacher, I just see kids who are starting to miss out on some pretty amazing opportunities and experiences, especially around winter time in Vermont and the loss of snow and canceling school ski trips and stuff like that. So I think convincing people that if anything, we should be doing this for our kids. We just like I appreciated all the people who are doing research on acid rain, and they helped save not only the Adirondacks, but acid rain from throughout the world. I think maybe talking about it as taking a chance and doing something about it so that our kids have something to look forward to. And so I think we're going to reach a tipping point, and I think we're starting to see that. So I'm hopeful that we will have more sustainable energy. We'll start to do more alternative forms that are more friendly and don't emit carbon dioxide. That's going to put a burden on the electrical grid, but we'll figure something out. But what's giving me hope is this idea of converting carbon dioxide back to O2. It'll be expensive, but if we can maybe harness the sun or solar or something to do that, I'm not sure, maybe even fission or fusion, or I don't know. There's got to be a way to do it. And researchers are doing it now at MIT and other places in California. They're working really hard to do that, but the funding isn't there. And we solved the acid rain problem by forcing industry not to stop burning coal, sadly, but to do something about that, the emissions, and converting them and capturing them and converting the nitrogen and sulfur into something harmless within the on-site power plants. And so I think converting that carbon dioxide based on the levels we're having and how much our emissions just keep continuing to climb, and parts per million of carbon dioxide increasing, I think that's going to be an important part of the puzzle.
Vermont-based science teacher and writer Bill Burrell is sailing across the Adirondack Park this summer to document the effects of climate change on the lakes of northern New York. He plans to chronicle his journey in a book after completing his voyage. You can get updates from Bill's travels on Instagram at the page Chionophile Uprising. That's CHIONOPHILE_uprising. You are listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. Lake George, the lake that some refer to as the jewel of the Adirondacks, is facing threats caused by invasive species, harmful algal blooms, road salt pollution, and climate change. But residents, municipalities, researchers, and environmental advocates around the lake are plugged in and stepping up to keep Lake George clean and clear. The nonprofit Lake George Association has launched a new effort to get property owners to play a larger role in protecting the Queen of American Lakes. On what's sometimes referred to as the most technologically advanced lake in the world, Lake George residents can now use an app to learn about how they can improve water quality on their own properties. I attended a demonstration of the technology to learn more. The conference center at the Fort William Henry Hotel at the South Basin of Lake George was filled with lake advocates and local property owners as researchers from the Lake George Association detailed ecological impacts on the 32-mile body of water. Brian Mattis, senior research specialist with the Jefferson Project, a collaboration between IBM Research, RPI's Darren Freshwater Institute, and the LGA, walked attendees through a slideshow of one of Lake George's more recent threats, harmful algal blooms.
This accumulation of colonies can be so dense that it looks like green paint on the surface of the water. And just like with most other organisms, once their population peaks and they have kind of run out of food, they sink back to the bottom and go dormant, starting the cycle all over again.
The first HAB was discovered on Lake George in November 2020. It's attributed in part to increases in nutrients into the lake from aging septic systems, lawn fertilizers, and stormwater runoff. While many upgrades have been made in recent years to reduce nutrient loading, including the construction of a new wastewater treatment facility in the village of Lake George, climate change can make problems like HABs worse. Eric Sy is the LGA's president.
The water quality is declining. We know that. Unless we up our game, unless we give everyone a role to play and create this very big tent approach, we will lose the lake.
Protecting water quality for a lake that drives a multi-billion-dollar economy is a top concern for advocates and local officials. Lake George has become a national model for reducing road salt pollution, managing the threats of invasive species, and now civic engagement. LGA's Lake Protector campaign is designed to get more residents involved. A mobile Lake Protector app allows property owners to get details about their land and what they can do to manage stormwater and septic pollution. LGA Managing Program Director Monica LaPlante demonstrated the program on the big screen, showing a lakefront parcel and details about its geography, impermeable surfaces, and more.
So this property has some steep slopes on it. You'll see by the pink coverage, and I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see, the whole watershed is covered here. And because you have steep slopes, you are given a very specific answer, and it tells you what to do, and then you're given actions based on that.
The app also provides solutions to potential problems and links to available funding to help manage risks. Gene Porter, who recently relocated to the northern end of the lake, came to the conference with his own concerns about managing stormwater.
I have a small waterfront place with a dock and boats in Ticonderoga, and I want to make sure that I'm doing what the community wants me to do on protecting the lake. And that's why I raised the issue about stormwater today, because I am one of the 35,000 private homes in the watershed that has untreated stormwater that goes into the lake.
Kathy Ervelina and her husband Sal, who live off Dunham's Bay in the southern portion of the lake, signed up for the Lake Protector app. About 500 property owners have registered so far in the watershed, where more than 9,000 properties are eligible.
It has to be done. The lake has to be protected.
The Ervelinas have done some work on their property to protect the lake, replacing their home's septic system with a model designed to reduce impacts. Kathy says she's now interested in ways to reduce stormwater runoff.
We're doing some work on the property, and I'm interested in possibly upgrading the landscaping to prevent runoff and stuff. So that's why we wanted to take a look at this program.
The LGA's Eric Sy says the Lake Protector program goes further than past efforts focused on merely educating residents and public officials.
We are now service providers, right? So we are doing some of the advanced work, the legwork, to catalyze participation and protection. The app is one piece of that. It is a tool that allows you to expedite the role you play in participating in protection. It's critical to the process. Otherwise, people are busy. Their lives are already full. What can we do to make sure they play their part?
You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. Coming up on the next episode of The Best of Our Knowledge, the Advanced James Webb Space Telescope has been shedding new light on the universe for a year now. The Best of Our Knowledge's Jody Cowan will speak with expert Carl Gordon from the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, about the telescope and its mission.
It's to look very deep into the universe and see some of the earliest galaxies, also to look at planets around stars, to look at exoplanets and try to understand what kind of planets they are and what kind of atmospheres they have, and everything in between, from nearby galaxies to stars to interstellar matter, everything.
Next week on The Best of Our Knowledge. And if you like what you hear on T-Book, please let us know. We're reachable at knowledge@wamc.org. This has been The Best of Our Knowledge, episode 1713. The Best of Our Knowledge is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Thanks to associate producer Jody Cowan. The latest on all National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter and our flagship station's website, wamc.org. Until next time, I'm Lucas Willard.